Yo, what's up? On today's episode of Santa Cruz Medicinals Radio, we're going to be talking about grains, legumes, beans, corn, oatmeal, wheat, all of those type of foods, what I think about them, what the research is showing us, and why I actually avoid a lot of those foods, and why I also eat some of them, like white rice. So, if you follow me, you know that I'm probably not somebody who's going to be eating a lot of grain or beans or other types of food like that. I really don't eat wheat, oatmeal, beans, chickpeas, or many other commonly produced grains and legumes or seeds in general. I will sometimes have white rice, and I will sometimes even have corn, and we'll get into that. But I think overall, you might think that this podcast is going to be me just like trashing grains and legumes. It's actually not going to be. I think you'll be very interested to see why I actually avoid those foods. But the point there being, you'll see that if they're prepared properly and enjoyed seldomly, I don't see a huge issue with them. I wouldn't freak out about having a tiny bit of wheat or a tiny bit of beans. It's not something I include in my diet, but they're not something that I panic about. So I think you're going to find that my harsh stance is against daily cereal grain consumption, and that is founded in facts, and we'll get into them right now. So I believe that the daily consumption of wheat and other cereal grains is horrible for human health, and I'll explain why. So what are grains? Grains are actually the dried seeds from plants called cereal grains. So the legume family also has beans, peas, lentils, soybeans, and peanuts. So legumes are actually very, very similar to seeds. They basically are seeds, with just a slightly different name. So a legume refers to any plant that would include its leaves, stems, and pods that is in the Fabaceae family is what it's called. And instead of calling them seeds, they call them pulses. So a pulse is the edible seed from the legume plant. So obviously these include beans, lentils, peas, and there's a lot of different types of legumes, but you can really lump grains and legumes, nuts, and seeds into a similar dietary family. So let's get into the history of grains. Human beings did not start to consume grain until about 20,000 years ago. And I say 20,000 years ago, but in reality, human beings did not consume grain in anything that we would resemble as today how we eat grain until about 10,000 years ago, when mass grain farming started and people were actually able to grow big corn fields, big wheat fields, and really start to grow these on a massive level and produce them. And they're still very different than they are today, but you can say around 10 to 11,000 years ago is when we started mass consuming grain. So just get it through your head. Homo sapien has been on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years without consuming grain. So when people say you need grains for a diet or the human being can't function without grain, that is not true at all. You wouldn't have made it this far as a species. We wouldn't have made it this far as human beings if we needed grain to live. Grain is not that old in the grand context of human history. So to be very clear, you don't need to eat grains or legumes to survive. You just don't. So let's get into some of the details about grain. So why I don't eat grains and some things you've probably heard about. Grains and legumes develop this outer coating that is very rich in phytic acid and lectins. And those can cause health issues if overconsumed. So to dive into the subject on lectins, I'm going to use a specific lectin called WGA, also known as wheat germ agglutinin, similar to the term gluten, but agglutinin. And I'm going to sort of use this one lectin to describe how lectins affect the body. So you eat this lectin, you consume it from wheat germ agglutinin, and it cannot be digested. So if you want an example that you could think of, go eat some whole corn and then look at your poop. It's not digested because that outer layer has lectins on it that prevent digestion. So what happens when this specific lectin that we're going to follow, wheat germ agglutinin, goes into your intestines? It attaches to the villi and microvilli. Those villi are there to help with nutrient absorption and digestion. So they're in your intestines, they're in your gut. But what happens when the lectins sort of hit that, they can't be broken down by the villi, and so the lectins go into your intestinal wall. What that does is it releases basically fully intact lectins into your body. And so your body notices these, and they're not supposed to be there, so it creates antibodies. And it sends out those antibodies to fight those lectins because If they are not fought, then lectins enter your bloodstream, which your body doesn't want. So when you consume wheat, barley, corn, oats, you can trigger an autoimmune response. Now, I am not somebody that says that everybody reacts the same to those lectins. Some people absolutely have different genetics where they can react very well, very different, I would say, to those lectins. So this is for some people when you eat grains and you notice like an autoimmune response. And what I'd highly recommend if you want to see where your body's at with that, eliminate grains for 30 days. It's 30 days of your life, see where you're at, and then add them back in. And you might notice that you're very sensitive to some of those lectins and they do trigger an autoimmune response. Autoimmune response, to just very simplify it, is you don't want to have your immune system ramped up all the time. A lot of people are dealing with autoimmune conditions, which can be gut issues, skin issues, brain fog, headaches, pain, joint pain, arthritis. These are autoimmune conditions because your immune system is not supposed to be at like 90% ramped up all the time. It's supposed to just be chilling until you actually have a threat come in, and then it is supposed to ramp up. This is why getting sick isn't necessarily bad. It's your immune system doing its job. But you should not be a little sick all the time. And that's really what's happening with a lot of these people that are consuming wheat at every single meal. They're just a little sick all the time. So again, when you're consuming wheat at every single meal, like most Americans are, or some type of grain, and just really lectin and phytic acid rich foods, you're firing up your immune system, especially if you're somebody who doesn't deal with them well, and you're also affecting your nutrient absorption. And why you're affecting your nutrient absorption, the next topic is phytic acid. So this is something we hear a lot from Carnivore MD. He talks about phytic acid a lot, and a lot of people in the carnivore community. I am not as staunchly against phytic acid. I'm not in some panic against phytic acid, although I think what they're saying makes a lot of sense because most Americans are consuming way too much phytic acid. So is it something I would panic if I'm consuming a little bit? No, I wouldn't. But if you're eating high phytic acid meals at every single meal, that can be an issue, and I'll tell you why. So phytic acid is typically made by grains and seeds and nuts to protect themselves. This is a plant that has to have protective mechanisms or else it just wouldn't be able to make it. It would just get eaten, killed off by bugs, by animals, all this type of stuff, and it wouldn't survive, so it wouldn't be able to pass on its seed. So phytic acid is stored in the form of phosphorus. It's found in many different plants, but it's way more rich in the bran of whole grains, nuts, and seeds. And herbivores like cows and sheep have different stomachs. They're ruminant animals, and they can digest phytate or phytic acid, whereas human beings cannot. This is definitely bad news because phytic acid binds to minerals in our gut, especially iron and zinc and magnesium. So what happens when you're consuming that phytic acid is it's binding to a lot of minerals in that food, and you're not absorbing those nutrients. So again, I think a little phytic acid is not a big deal, but if you're eating a sandwich and you're thinking that you're going to get all those nutrients absorbed from all the food in there, but the wheat on that sandwich is very rich in phytic acid, you're definitely going to not absorb as many nutrients. So yeah, it's definitely an issue. Now, the preparation of foods rich in lectins and phytic acid matters so much, and this is something we've sort of lost throughout the years, and this is why I avoid traditional grains. Corn, for example. Corn is high in phytic acid and low in phytase, which is a bad combination because it's just a really rich phytic acid food. However, our ancestors knew this. The Native Americans and traditional Mexican cultures oftentimes would ferment cornmeal for 2 weeks, wrap it in corn husks, and then prepare it into their flatbread or their tortilla. In Africa, corn is fermented for long periods of time using a lactobacillus culture, and that is how they produce their traditional cornmeal foods. This is because these cultures have instinctively known that these foods they definitely can't be digested raw. They definitely need preparation to reduce the phytic acid to improve nutrient absorption when you consume them. So one big issue I have is when you just go to the store and you're buying a corn tortilla, they have not done that process. They have not soaked the corn. They haven't fermented it. And so the phytic acid levels are still very, very high. And you can also think about rice. In almost all cultures, and if you have a grandma that's, maybe Indian like my grandma, or, any type of grandma probably, they're usually soaking and rinsing their rice. Why is that? That reduces the phytic acid and a lot of these plant defense chemicals that these grains, seeds, nuts have. Soaking, rinsing. This is also not done in traditional modern American culture, and it is definitely not done by some big food conglomerate before they prep your product in some packaged food. So when I eat white rice, I like to rinse it very well because that reduces the amount of phytic acid in there. And I also eat white rice, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But that outer hull of that brown rice, it's not better for you at all. That outer hull does have more fiber on the surface, but it's so rich in phytic acid and other plant defense chemicals that you actually don't absorb those nutrients or fiber that it has. So this is why when people eat brown rice, they sometimes get gut distress. Yeah, you're consuming this outer hull for no reason. When you could really just consume the dehulled, which white rice and brown rice are the same thing. Brown rice gets dehulled and it becomes white rice. So always eat white rice if you're going to eat white rice, so rice in general. So another thing to look out for in grains and grain eaters is digestive enzyme inhibitors. So grains do contain digestive enzyme inhibitors. Our body uses our digestive enzymes in our gut to break down food and assimilate all the nutrients from our food. And there's lots of studies showing that grains contain protease and amylase inhibiting enzymes. So within those same studies, I've read a lot of them, they also do mention that soaking and fermenting these grains can reduce those digestive enzyme inhibitors. Again, the store-bought bread, the cereal, they are not doing that process at all. So am I against grain in the modern form? Yes. If you're going to soak and ferment some of your grains, and some people do that, that's going to be a way better option. So the cereal you're eating, the beans at Chipotle, they weren't prepared properly. The beans weren't soaked. The cereal grains weren't fermented. They didn't go through any of these processes that our ancestors have known forever to reduce those digestive enzyme inhibitors, the phytic acid, those lectins, and make it a more consumable grain. They just go right from grain to you're supposed to eat it and digest it, and many people cannot. So if you deal well with grains and you have no autoimmune issues and you consume them in a traditional way with soaking and fermenting, should you still eat a lot of grain? My answer is no. And why is my answer no? Well, I think a big reason there is carbohydrates. So I'm a fan of carbs. I eat a lot of carbohydrates. I train a lot. I work out a lot. I love carbs. I prefer to get my carbs from fruit, squash, sweet potatoes, white rice, some vegetables, raw honey, because what I'm looking for with my carbohydrate sources is carbs that don't have a lot of phytic acid, are low in lectins, are super rich in nutrients, and that's going to be something that I want to eat. My first goal is obviously to hit my protein goal during the day, but I'm also eating carbs throughout the day from those sources. So if you're just looking, oh, I want to eat a lot of grain, I'll prepare it the right way, and my body deals well with it, we know that consuming too many carbohydrates, especially if you're not somebody who's working out or training hard, is going to lead to high blood sugar, which is a huge issue. It's a root of many common diseases such as PCOS, diabetes, obesity, heart disease. You don't want to be making grains the main focus of your diet, which is the main focus of American diets. I think about 40% of our calories come from wheat at this point. That's a lot. So oatmeal is another common one that people talk about. If you wake up and you like your oats and you prepare them properly, you soak them, you're not adding crazy amounts of sugar or whatever, then eat your oats. It's not something that I like, that I eat. There are lectins, there are proteins similar to gluten in there that I'm not a fan of. And there's this other thing with grains is that they basically trigger a similar process to opioids, which sort of makes them addicting, which is why it's hard to quit oatmeal and it's hard to quit grains. But I think if you cut it out for 30 days, you could see how you feel and then add it back in if you really want. The other benefits I get from eating fruits, vegetables, sweet potatoes, squash as my carbohydrate sources is I get a lot of vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, beneficial enzymes, pectin, which is like fruit fiber that I just don't get from grains. People often say that grains have B vitamins, and that's true to some extent, but if you're eating a bunch of B vitamins with a high dose of phytic acid and possibly getting an autoimmune response with that, your body isn't going to absorb those vitamins and minerals as well, and you're also going to have potentially an autoimmune response if you don't deal well with the grains. That's just not a good combo, and that's not worth honestly a pretty low level of B vitamins, which are in grains, compared to, starting your day with some eggs or some steak or like our paleo protein shake with fruit in there. That's just going to be more nutrient dense and more friendly on your gut. And then another very common thing people say is, well, I have to eat a lot of grains all the time and beans and legumes because of fiber. Fiber is the best. Fiber cures cancer. We've heard this, and it's not true. I'm a fan of getting some fiber, but again, I get my fiber from the carb sources I discussed above. I eat fruit. I just had some butternut squash last night. That's a lot of fiber in there. I had some veggies in my beef stew, like some carrots. I like zucchini. Fruit has fiber, whole fruit. So I do get fiber. If you want to look into some of the info around fiber, Carnivore MD has some great info on that. There's a lot of myths about fiber, which he covers. One of the main ones that I like to discuss is that the fiber helps cancer, especially colon cancer. There's a really good study where they set out to prove that a diet with fruits and veggies versus a diet with cereal fiber plus fruits and veggies, that diet with that fiber supplement from cereal grains would help more than just a diet rich in fruit and vegetables. So the name of this study is The Lack of Effect of a High Fiber Cereal Supplement on the Recurrence of Colorectal Adenomas, which is colon cancer. This was a big study, almost 2,000 people. What they found was no difference at all between the group who just ate fruit and vegetables versus the group who ate fruit and vegetables with that cereal fiber supplement. So I'm not a fan of fiber supplements at all. The evidence that fiber helps cancer is not strong, and you can certainly get enough fiber from just eating the carbohydrate sources I discussed above without grains. Another thing people say is fiber lowers your cholesterol. There's a bunch of studies on this. Fiber actually does not lower your cholesterol to any significant amount. You're talking a few points, if you want to call it that. And if you follow what I speak about, the goal of human health should not be to lower cholesterol as much. People with very low cholesterol get heart attacks all the time. Cholesterol is not the full discussion of heart disease, and I think we'll sort of move away from that in health. It might take a little while. And then a lot of people that are doing high fiber diets, they will have gut issues, and that they'll notice that fiber aggravates their gut issues. This can be because of maybe a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, other gut issues where fiber is actually going to make your health worse. This isn't the case for all people, especially somebody with a healthy gut, but this is why so many people go carnivore and they have these amazing just changes in their health, whether it's eczema or gut issues or IBS. This might be because they have some type of bacterial overgrowth in their gut and it's feeding off of that insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber, we know, look, almost everybody has eaten a bunch of beans and cannot stop farting. That's just the most classic thing ever. Beans make you fart. Why is that? Insoluble fiber, which can basically cause gut distress, and it's also combined with a lot of lectins typically because those beans aren't prepared properly, and that's going to cause gut distress. That's not good for your gut to have excess flatulence. That's a clear sign that legumes can affect your gut in a negative way. So if you really like beans and feel good eating them, I would suggest soaking them, to prevent some of those anti-nutrients and lectins and other compounds that are negative in legumes, grains, and seeds. So overall, I'm not some crazy anti-grain guy, like I think they're the most evil food in the world or anything like that. I think they're really essential for human survival and just how we've evolved as human beings in the last 10,000 years, and they feed a lot of people, which is very critical. But with my diet, I am not looking towards, hey, what can I get to just keep me alive and feed me and give me the food that can feed hundreds of millions of people. That's not really what I'm going for. I'm going for a diet that's really healthy, and that includes unprocessed foods. And grains are oftentimes very processed. So if all grains around us were traditionally prepared, they weren't sprayed with pesticides, then not soaked or fermented or have any of the traditional ways of preparing grain that we know benefit them, then I might eat more of them. But right now, that's not the case at all. So on vacation, I might have some tacos with some corn tortillas. I eat white rice weekly because I get organic white rice and I soak it. And when my friends ask me, what kind of bread should I get? What's the healthiest? I typically tell them to look for a traditional sourdough. It's going to be usually better digested, but it's not really a health food. Another, again, a common one is oatmeal. People love their oatmeal. If you like it and you're, using it to maybe as a vehicle to get good protein in and you feel great on it, go ahead and eat it. I would highly suggest eliminating it for 30 days and then adding it back in to see how you feel. But I just noticed when I have a lot of grains in my diet, I get gut, skin, and brain reactions. So I get brain fog, I get gut reactions, and I get skin reactions. I just had somebody DM me, again, another guy with eczema all over his arm. He did the Santa Cruz Medicinals diet he's only like 8 days in, and his arm, I posted it on my story, his arm is completely clear now. It's amazing, and that's the case for a lot of people because these grains, seeds, legumes are triggering an autoimmune response. So when you take that out for a bit, it's not to say you can't ever eat them again, but you need to let your immune system just sort of chill out. I also think grains are heavily pushed by our government because it's a very cheap way to feed people. Your tax dollars literally go towards subsidizing the farming of wheat, corn, and soy. These are a cheap source of calories for many people. Your government, I hope you've sort of realized, isn't about, hey, how do we optimize everybody's health? They have a bigger problem on their hands, which is how do we feed everybody? But if you're listening to this, you're probably not looking, hey, what's the cheapest way to eat? You're probably looking, what's the healthiest way to eat? So what I would say, if you're listening to this and you still eat bread and cereal and all that type of stuff, try going without it for 30 days. Eat a lot of carbs, that's fine, but get your carbs from sweet potato, white rice, fruits, some vegetables, raw honey. There's plenty options right there. So that is sort of my summary on grains. I know a lot of people have been asking me to do this podcast so they can show somebody, hey, this is why I don't eat grains. So I think maybe people expect me to go a little bit harder at them. I don't think they're that bad. I just think in the way that we are presented grain in our diet today, it is bad. Triggers your autoimmune issues, and it's just a way better feeling eliminating them. So that's it. As always, if you want to get some of our products, type in Santa Cruz Paleo into Amazon or go to scmedicinals.com to get our CBD formulas. We're going to release creatine soon. We're going to release beef tallow or chata proteins coming soon. The electrolytes are going to be back in stock soon, so I'm really stoked on all that stuff. I appreciate your guys' support. And yeah, always comment other topics that you want to see me cover on Santa Cruz Medicinals Radio. That's it. Appreciate it.